I don't know what all that about. Don't know what that's all about. Andale pues. A brief history of monopoly building in America. Over the course of this nation's history, there have been at least three major phases of monopoly building for wealth and power. The first monopoly building phase in American history occurred during the colonization of America when Europeans in general and the English in particular formed and held natural monopolies in land ownership, slave trading, and slavery supported industries. England exerted the power of its newly founded slavery based wealth by instituting the Navigation Act in the 1760s and other laws and tariffs that mandated that American colonists ship their slave produced raw products and goods to England for processing, manufacturing, and marketing. The colonists then had to purchase back the finished products at higher and inflated prices. This system effectively allowed England to exercise full economic and political control and to economically exploit its colonies as well as other nations. England became the king slave trading, and England became the king of slave trading and held a natural monopoly on constructing slave based economies. The English crown continued or established the first franchising system that built plantations, financed the slaveholders, supplied the slaves, and shipped and processed the slave produced goods. It took a full century for the American colonists to recognize that they were locked into an English monopoly. Once the reality set in, they began calling the monopolies tyranny. The American colonies rejected England's plans to expropriate the fruits of slave labor and to control the politics of the colonies. The colonists knew from the English history of serfdom that any system that politically subordinates, economically exploits, and socially dominates a group of people is tyrannical because it reduces them to slaves. The colonists did not want to be England's serfs. They preferred to fight, and when they did, they ignited and fought the Revolutionary War for their independence. The second phase of monopoly building began shortly after the Revolutionary War. The American colonists immediately drafted the United States Constitution, which imposed on black people the same government sponsored tyranny that the colonists or colonialists rejected under the English rule. The founding fathers of this nation, most of whom were slaveholders and sympathetic to other slaveholders, drafted and ratified the United States Constitution. That document gave the colonial slaveholders a collusive monopoly, the same monopolistic controls that England had over their colonists before the war. Just as slave labor, just as slave labor had made England wealthy, it allowed Southern slaveholders to operate in their own best interests rather than the best interest of Northern whites or enslaved blacks. The North eventually concluded that it could not acquire competitive wealth and political power until it broke the South's monopoly on black labor. In 1861, the Civil War broke out between the North and the South over wealth and political power. The third phase of monopoly building occurred after the North won the Civil War. The war effectively destroyed legalized slavery and transferred the South's monopoly on wealth and political power to the North. The North focused its newly acquired wealth and power on industrializing the North and the West. The massive amounts of money previously invested in the slavery industry and the Civil War and the Civil War military production was used to build bridges, canals, railroads, ships, and factories. However, in achieving the political and economic defeat of the South, the North had ignored the 5 million ex-slaves. Major political organizations in the North went on record opposing emancipation of enslaved blacks unless they were shipped out of the country in order that they not compete against white men's labor. Steven Steinberg wrote. The North abandoned black ex-slaves. The South got the message and commandeered blacks into semi-slavery, while the North looked the other way. According to a memorandum of proceedings in the United States Senate, the Southern states, by their situation and climate, require black labor and must have it, or the states will cease to have any value. The Southern states enacted black codes that again gave them a shared monopoly control on land, economic systems, governments, education systems, and black labor for another 100 years. Both the North and the South used various levels of government to create white-only business and political, intellectual, and social monopolies. These advantages of property, technology, political participation, and major business opportunities were passed on to succeeding generations of white males. Racial monopolies in America. Racial monopolies determine winners and losers and are considered a normal part of our politico-economic structure. Through these monopolies, white society maintains a lock on the essential elements of black people's lives and makes black people spectators in the democratic process. The racial monopolies discussed below are but a few of the nearly invisible structures that marginalize and justify black America's position as the nation's permanent minority loser. Monopolies. Monopolies established in the Constitution. As indicated earlier, the United States Constitution is not, and has never been colorblind. It is race-specific and color-conscious. For all intents and purposes, the Constitution remains unchanged. The founding fathers were the first ones to play the race card, play the race card. In fact, they were the original card dealers. They allocated rights, resources, and power to the majority white society. America essentially has two constitutions, one for whites and one for blacks. Constitutional amendments 1 through 12 are race specific and empower the majority white society. The 13th through 15th amendments were also color specific. They gave citizenship and empowerment rights to black ex slaves. The 13th Amendment eliminated legal slavery. The 14th Amendment gave blacks equal protection and due process rights. The 15th Amendment extended voting and other social rights to blacks. Majority society has co opted these amendments. During Reconstruction in the 1860s, major social and economic forces began to make these amendments colorblind, even though they were originally specific to blacks. The term colorblind was not formally used until 1896 when Chief Justice John H. Harlan of the Supreme Court issued a dissenting opinion in the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. The Supreme Court held that there was nothing wrong with separate but equal accommodations for blacks and whites as a public policy. But Justin Harlan said the Constitution was colorblind. He was the first to say it, but he was wrong. The Constitution is and always has been color specific. All right. The color consciousness of the Constitution was no accident. The Constitution codified the racial inequalities that existed initially in our society. James Madison, a major author of the Constitution and a slaveholder, knew he was not including black people when he spoke of how the country would always be divided between those who held property and those who were themselves property. When he spoke of owning property, he meant items such as household furnishings, livestock, and land. He also clearly included ownership of slaves. When the Constitution was finally ratified in 1789, however, it used broad, ambiguous, and inoffensive public relations type words such as all and everyone rather than to refer directly to black slaves. Still, it established a system which the racial group defined as white could hold monopolies of wealth and power over the subordinate black group that was classified as personal property and only three-fifths of a human. The Constitution also included an affirmative action provision for the South that eventually led to a civil war between the North and South. The Constitution made white Southerners a protected minority with the privilege of holding a monopoly on slavery. More specifically, provisions in the U.S. Constitution gave the Southern minority political rights, preferential treatment in the Fugitive Slave Act, favorable quotas on the export and import of slavery related products, and set aside advantages on elected representation in Congress. This revered document declared freedom and justice for everyone but blacks, while giving special status, privileges, and rights to the South. The Constitution continues to be used as the basis to deny preferences, affirmative action, and reparations for black Americans. Citizenship, and the benefits of whiteness are constitutionally constitutionally denied to blacks. Ironically, like blacks, Indians were also specifically identified in the Constitution, but they were excluded from official abuse because they were categorized as free inhabitants and encouraged to assimilate into white society. By the end of the 19th century, American Indians had the option to leave the reservations or remain protected wards of the government. Yet, throughout their relationship, white leaders and various institutions have recognized Indians as an acceptable extension of white society and ranked higher in the biological order than blacks. When the U.S. Constitution was modified in the 1860s through the addition of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the Black Constitution, after the Black Constitution, after numerous rewrites, the final language contained ambiguous words such as all persons, any person, and everyone, although it was commonly understood that the constitutional amendments were for black ex-slaves. The initial congressional enabling language hinted that these civil rights laws bound the U.S. Congress to take care of black ex-slaves until they could take care of themselves. The initial congressional enabling language hinted that the civil rights laws bound the U.S. Congress to take care of black ex slaves until they could take care of themselves. To this day, however, Congress has never abided by their own laws in this regard, and members have sat by silently while the dominant society has boldly undermined the economic rights awarded to black people. They allow the majority white society to co opt the black Constitution and promote the myth that the United States Constitution was colorblind. The Constitution was conceived as a socio-economic covenant for those who already had power, wealth, and nearly unlimited rights. To be a truly democratic society, this nation would have to redistribute and share some of its wealth and power with Black America. The Black Constitution was passed following the Civil War because the efforts of a small group of radical liberal Republican congressmen who succeeded in amending the Constitution by including color specific amendments for black. The Black Constitution was passed following the Civil War because of the efforts of a small group of radical liberal Republican congressmen who succeeded in amending the Constitution by including color specific amendments for black. These amendments gave blacks a minimum level of rights that certain congressmen hoped would offset some of the tyranny of the majority of the white majority society. Population monopolies. Population monopolies. One of the first acts of the U.S. Congress following the ratification of the Constitution was the enactment of the nation's first naturalization and immigration law in 1790. This law declared America to be a white nation and set a zero quota on black immigrants except as slaves. A quota of approximately zero remained in effect until 1965 when it was increased to its current level of one half of 1%. Throughout most of this nation's history, peoples of African descent have been nearly shut out of the immigration and refugee programs of the United States. Blacks have competed in this nation's majority wins population game. Okay, blacks have competed in this nation's majority wins population game almost exclusively from birth rates rather than immigration. Though they could never win as a national majority, they also have never won as a local majority. The civil rights or integration ensured that blacks would always communities and entertainment centers. The census is conducted every decade and establishes the official population count of the country. Efforts to create a multicultural category in the 2000 census will most likely dilute and in reality distort downward the number of blacks in America. Dilution of population numbers assures that blacks will lose status as a numerical majority minority. Government efforts to change racial definitions will retain the white population majority monopoly and inflate the numbers of Hispanics and in the population. In his book Uprooting Racism, Paul Keevil says whiteness is a many faceted phenomenon, slowly and constantly shifting its emphasis, all the time maintaining a racial hierarchy and protecting the power that accrues to white people. Although there are no natural or essential qualities or characteristics of whiteness or of white people, it is not an easy fiction to let go of. By constantly by constantly enlarging the ethnic boundaries of whiteness, all Europeans, Middle Easterners, Hispanics, and soon Asians, whites separate people who are entitled to privileges and wealth from people who are exploited and violated. In a group based society, constant efforts to enlarge the majority white population ensure that a shred of racial population monopoly will continue to exist far into the future. The 2000 census form offers blacks 54 subcategories to opt out of their race and further atomize, atomize their population numbers. The census will not dilute whiteness. On the contrary, it further expands the definition of whiteness. Let's look at how a shared white monopoly impacts black America's life chances. Whites are a planned majority. Blacks, on the other hand, are a planned permanent minority. Limited by immigration policies, blacks are only 12.4% of the general population. They are outnumbered 7 to 1 by a shared white majority that is 87% of the population. This means that whites can override blacks at least 7 times, at least, or this means that whites can override blacks at least can override blacks at least 7 times, making it impossible for blacks to take over anything. Moreover, with the exception of entertainment, blacks do not exceed 1% of ownership, control, or representation of anything positive in American society. In critical skilled professions such as doctors, lawyers, architects, engineers, scientists, judges, physicists, business owners, wealth holders, and elective elective officials, blacks never exceed 1/2 of 1%. If every black professional was hired in public sector or private sector jobs, whites would still hold 99.5% of the professional positions. If all of the 36 million black people in the entire country were employed, the educated, the uneducated, the educated, the uneducated, senior citizens, those in prison, children, infants, teenagers, their total numbers would never exceed 12% of the workforce. When blacks try to even marginally increase their percentage in the workforce, whites are threatened and initiate a black backlash. Initiate a black backlash.